Okay, what I had to look up was dissolved oxygen in water. What it basically is dissolved oxygen is a natural occurring thing. I wouldn't consider it really a pollutant because it's natural. Um, but however, some things that humans do can affect the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. And basically it's measured in milligrams per liter of water. Now what it means if you have a low amount of dissolved oxygen is it may indicate there's raw sewage in the water that you're actually testing. This is because raw sewage is decomposed with anaerobic bacteria, and when you have a large amount of anaerobic bacteria, that actually eats up the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water in order for them to survive through the decomposition process. And this is bad because fish and other living organisms that are in the water that need this dissolved oxygen to live, if there's sewage in the water, all the oxygen's being used up, and basically then they won't have any. So the more raw sewage in the water, the less oxygen you're going to have, and the less nutrients and stuff you're going to have for the fish in order to live there. High oxygen, basically high oxygen, you can find this in places like at the top of streams where the water's flowing a lot, because they say when the water mixes a lot, it gets more dissolved oxygen into the water. Shallow streams is where you basically find shallow, slow-moving streams tend to have lower amounts of dissolved oxygen in them. The ocean has a lot of dissolved oxygen into it because it's churning, and then also when the rain molecules get oxygen, they oxygenate the water, as well as plants and stuff that are inside the water, like seaweed and other large plants that you can find in the ocean. Algae blooms are one of the largest things in the ocean that create large amounts of oxygen. Now this is bad because when you get too much oxygen, this is when you get the eutrophic environment you can get, and basically these organisms can then use up too much of the nutrients that are needed to sustain life within that ecosystem. So if you have algae blooms that are producing a lot of oxygen, then the fish in the water are going to be able to become larger, and these larger fish are going to then use up more nutrients than they did before. And because of that, the ecosystem won't be sustainable for a very long time before it eventually will kill itself because it becomes too plentiful. Here's a visual aid showing like the amounts of dissolved oxygen that are needed for certain types of fish or organisms in the water. As you can see, in the deeper habitats, there's less dissolved oxygen just because there is the surface area has the most dissolved oxygen because it can come from the rainwater as well as churning and stuff. And so the deeper areas don't have as much dissolved oxygen because there's not as many plants down there as well. And you can see how the amounts of dissolved oxygen in the water, this is milligrams per liter, can have an impact on what organisms are able to live there because the larger organisms need more dissolved oxygen in order to cellular respirate properly. So there's an equilibrium. Either too much dissolved oxygen in an environment or too little becomes deadly for the ecosystem because eventually it will starve off the organisms of the nutrients that they need. And the way to measure dissolved oxygen is you can use a dissolved oxygen meter, which basically forces water through a membrane, and the oxygen particles, it collects them on an electrode, so then you can measure the amount. They're like $60, I guess, were the cheaper ones that I could find. I'm sure there's probably cheaper ones, and I know there's ones that are a lot more expensive of these that you can buy. So I'm not sure if we have one of those, but there's also the Winkler's method, which involves a lot of calculations that you have to do. The Winkler's method takes longer, but I'm not sure if we have a dissolved oxygen meter here, so we might have to do that if we were trying to measure that in the water. And that's what I got for you.
Specific levels for safe drinking water?
I was thinking, I'm not sure because I never said anything that said there's like a deadly level of amount of dissolved oxygen in water. And so that's what I know. I really don't think the drinking water dissolved oxygen has a major impact on us. I feel like it mostly has an impact because the fish and the organisms need it to cellular respirate, which we don't need that because we're breathing.
Okay, so let's think of the different levels though. Safe drinking water, water allocated, healthy ecosystems. So healthy ecosystems are going to have maybe more dissolved oxygen, the levels are gonna be different than say safe drinking water. So Adam, here's what I want,
But
here's what I want you to do, Adam.
it all depends on the organisms within the ecosystem on what's a good amount.
Right, so here's what I want you to do. My goal is to upload all these videos onto my website, by the end of the day tomorrow. Adam, would you, when are you leaving for spring break?
Friday morning.
Friday morning. Okay, I'll try and do it during school on Thursday. Will you go on and make a comment on your video with the layers, different levels according to the different, like, this is for drinking water, this is for just sustainable water, this is when the water is dangerous,
Okay, yeah.
and just make a comment on that then?
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? Alright, let's move on. Next.